I'll start out by just saying that I've been a typical entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, as they call it in Silicon Valley, which is somebody who does a series of startups, one after the other. And I started out, my really first startup was Electronic Arts, so that was quite lucky because after it went public, then I had the freedom to do many more startups. But the fact of the matter is I never worked any place more than 7 years in my 35-year career because once you get to a certain point, either growth size or you sometimes get acquired. Once you've accomplished what you need to, there's no reason to stick with it. I like working for myself. I like working with startups, and so I've changed industries a lot. I've been in the printing industry. I've been a co-producer of movies. I've been in the hospitality industry. I opened a club in a 5-star resort hotel in Florence, Italy, a few years back. I've been in the ticketing industry, and then of course a number of software companies. But today, what I was going to talk about with all of you was Electronic Arts started only by marketers? The answer is absolutely yes. And then I'll mention a little bit about creating global reach for both that company and then companies today. So the question for me with Electronic Arts, or for all of us to ponder, is how did we get from here This was one of our early sports simulations, if you can believe it. It was Dr. J and Larry Bird go one-on-one. Those are two famous basketball players in the United States. And this was about in 1984 or something like that. Dr. J and Larry Bird actually did come to our offices and consult with us and provide us with their statistics and their, the percentages of shots that they make from outside the three-point line and how many dunks they are have on their record, so that we could work those statistics into the game. So despite the fact that was on an Apple II, by the way, we had it on the Atari and the Commodore 64 as well. But despite the fact that the graphics on that Apple and the sound on that Apple were just pitiful, it was still a very, very popular game because a player knew that the stats of Dr. J and Larry Bird were built into the algorithms that were used for when you controlled your player. If you knew that Larry Bird was a great outside shooter, you could use that knowledge and make a much better game out of the one-on-one play by shooting from a distance. It was built in. So that was creating these games with the stars, star athletes, really helped us kind of build the idea of how to do a simulation. So how did we get from there to this? So this is, I don't even know which year. This is obviously FIFA football. And when we started the company, what our image in our head, our mindset was, we wanted to be able to do this kind of simulation of sports. Now we have a whole division of Electronic Arts called Electronic Arts Sports. EA Sports is what it is. That's EA Sports. It's in the game. You know that phrase? So this was how we wanted to be able to create things back in 1982. But the software and the hardware just weren't up to speed. I mean, you could see that, you could hear that Apple didn't have much, had very crude sound. Now the Atari had much better sound, so it was better. But it's really interesting to me to see the difference in that. And it was only, we didn't get to this kind of animation and realistic movement and all until about the late 90s. So we went public in 1989 and released John Madden Football. That's the American football game that we had really spent a lot of time and effort to try to perfect. I think that was released in 1991. Yeah. And so then I'd say that FIFA football is the epitome of what we wanted to be able to do for realistic simulations of games. But how did we get there? Well, we're never in a garage. This is the garage that David Packard and Bill Hewlett, that's where they started Hewlett-Packard in Palo Alto. That was not our style. We had one of our founders, Trip Hawkins, had a ranch in Portola Valley, which is right behind Stanford. Beautiful home. He invited five of us, plus himself, there were 6 of us, to dinner in July of 1982 at his home. I think Neldo was the name of his housekeeper. He was not married. He was 28. The rest of us were in our 30s. And I see that my slide is not fitting exactly because we've got more. I don't know how to move it down, but because there were 6 of us, and you can't see them all. But Trip was a classmate of mine at the business school at Stanford. So was Bing. But Trip was an undergraduate at Harvard, and his major was strategy gaming. So he was not an engineer at all. He'd gone to Apple Computer right out of our business school class, and he was employee number 50 or thereabouts. So he got, obtained a number of shares of stock in lieu of salary, or a big salary. Anyway, he didn't have a big salary. He had plenty of stock. So that by the time 1982 came along, and there he was the marketing, I believe the product manager or marketing manager for the Lisa. Has anybody heard of the Lisa? Which, of course, was a complete failure in the marketplace. And Steve Jobs had been taken off of the, of the Lisa project because it was completely out of control. And basically, Trip took over. So Steve and Trip never really got along all that well, although I think that there was mutual respect because we all knew Steve Jobs as a result of the fact that he was quite aware of Electronic Arts' beginning. But Trip had made, by 1982, Trip had made a few $1,000,000 in Apple stock, maybe 7, 8. It was under 10, I think. But at age 28, that was not too bad. So he was able to provide us seed funding. And because of that, we never had to be in a garage. We were in Class A buildings from the very beginning. So Rich was, he was about 10 years older than the rest of us. So our team was Trip, who was the youngest, 28. The rest of us were 32, except Rich, who was about 42. So we had some age, but we also had a youngster. But we weren't in our early 20s. So we'd had experience. We had MBAs. Rich was a UC Berkeley graduate and a Stanford MBA. His major in undergraduate school was physics. Bing was in Trips in my Stanford MBA class, and he'd gone to Yale as an undergraduate and was an English major. He was in advertising, as a matter of fact. Tremendously creative mind. I had done anthropology as an undergraduate major at Stanford, and then I did my MBA at Stanford. And then, I don't know how to get to them, but there's a guy named Dave Evans. He was our only technical kind of guy, but he was a mechanical engineer. That's not exactly a software programmer. He had an undergraduate degree at Stanford and a master's at Stanford in mechanical engineering. And we had one woman named Pat Marriott, and she had been working with Trip at Apple on the Lisa project. So Dave Evans had 2. So he brought 2 of the people that he knew at Apple that he thought were extremely talented. And then Bing and Rich and I had, of course, Bing, Tripp, and I knew each other, and Rich was from a really famous PR firm in Silicon Valley, and at the time he joined us, he was vice president of VisiCorp, which was the company that made VisiCalc. VisiCalc was that first spreadsheet that I first saw on an Apple II that made me decide I had to get into the computer industry because it was clear that was going to be changing the way the world worked, or at least it was clear to me. So the six of us, a little tidbit here, when you start a company, one of the things you have to do is agree that there's going to be one leader. Everybody can't have the same amount of power in a company. So we kind of divide up. I was in charge of international business because that's what I had done for the previous years of my career at that time. Rich was kind of our marketing guy and sales. Bing was certainly the advertising maven that we had, and he was great. Dave and Pat were both producers, what we call producers, which was the functional equivalent of an A&R person in the music industry. So they went out and recruited software developers, independent software developers, to allow us to publish their creations. They tried to find the best in the United States, and convince them that they should allow us to publish their products. And so that was the group. Not any of us knew how to program. But the closest, I guess, we came to was that I'd come from a games company, Atari, and Tripp had a strategy gaming major at Harvard. So there was some connection to the gaming world. Oops, gotta point that way. Did I turn it off somehow or another? There we go. Thank you. It works to turn off the... Let's see here. You want to see if you can get it back going? Maybe we have a battery failure. Anyway, one of the things that Bing did as an advertising, he'd been an advertising executive in San Francisco for a few years out of business school, and he convinced two of his cohorts at the advertising agency where he worked to leave that agency and start their own company to be funded by Electronic Arts. Their first customer or client would be Electronic Arts, and we'd pay them enough in order to help them survive so that they could start their own company. And that was Jeff Goodby and Rich Silverstein, and they now have, over the last 30 years, they've built the largest advertising agency in the Western United States. They've been very successful. That was the next slide. Fine. I don't have to. Oh, that's too many slides. So we back up one. We had in 1980. So we started the company, we had a meeting in July. Started the company in August, and by can we try your clicker, please? Because that doesn't work. My clicker is in my backpack.
Okay, so we'll try to do it by hand.
Oh, okay. So can you back up? There, that's perfect. I wanted to show just briefly that by November of 1982, we had raised $5 million with the top venture firms in the San Francisco Bay Area. Kleiner Perkins, Sequoia, it's Don Valentine's company, and then Seven Rosen. And there were about 6 venture firms that wanted to invest in us, but we only wanted 3. And so we were in a rare position of being able to choose our investors. And the ones that we didn't choose were forever angry at us for not letting them in on the deal. Now, we didn't have anything when we went to them with a plan. We had a plan. We didn't have any products. None of us had done a startup before. 1982, that wasn't so uncommon because it certainly wasn't in 82 like it is now, where there's thousands of companies getting started. 82 was sort of the beginning, front edge of that, and there was no company that had done software for gaming and gone to the venture capital community to get funded. So we were a little bit unusual in that way. But what the point is that our venture capitalists were convinced that because of our backgrounds and our training and our intelligence and talents, we could all work together and produce and deliver on the promise we made to them, which was we would publish and distribute through retail stores at least 6 titles of software within the first 6 months of getting funded by them. So in November, they funded us. We had a big party to congratulate ourselves and bring our friends together and announce the existence of Electronic Arts and having been funded by these top venture firms. Yeah, let's see, what can be my signal to you to go to the next slide? All right, so...
You can swipe.
Oh, okay, that's a good idea. I'll swipe. So this is in 1982, there was no internet. We had television or print advertising was the only way that we really could reach people. And so our advertising agency, Jeff and Rich were brilliant, and they actually wrote this, the text of this ad, which is, you can't read it from where you are, but let me see if I can read it to you, because it epitomizes the attitude that we came to market with. We ran this ad, double-page spread, in Newsweek and Scientific American. Not exactly the magazines you might think we would run them in. Newsweek was sort of a consumer magazine, and Scientific American was definitely a geeks magazine. Okay. No. So if you don't mind my looking down, I'll read it because I think it's very interesting. Of course, the title was unusual for an ad back then. Can a computer make you cry? And it says, right now, no one knows. This is partly because many would consider the very idea frivolous. But it's also because whoever successfully answers the question must first have answered several others. Why do we cry? Why do we laugh or love or smile? What are the touchstones of our emotions? Until now, the people who asked such questions tended not to be the same people who ran software companies. Instead, they were writers, filmmakers, painters, musicians. They were, in the traditional sense, artists. We're about to change that tradition. The name of our company is Electronic Arts. Then in a subtitle, Software Worthy of the Minds That Use It. We are a new association of electronic artists, united by a common goal to fulfill the enormous potential of the personal computer. In the short term, this means transcending its present use as a facilitator of unimaginative tasks and a medium for blasting aliens. In the long term, however, we can expect a great deal more. These are wondrous machines we have created, and in them can be seen a bit of their makers. It is as if we had invested them with the images, with the image of our minds. And through them, we're learning more and more about ourselves. We learn, for instance, that we are more entertained by the involvement of our imagination than by passive viewing and listening. We learn that we are better taught by experience than by memorization. And we learn that the traditional distinction, the ones that are made between art, entertainment, and education, don't always apply. Toward a language of dreams. In short, we are finding that the computer can be more than just a processor of data. It is a communications medium an interactive tool that can bring people's thoughts and feelings closer together, perhaps closer than ever before. And while 50 years from now, or even 30 years from now, its creation may seem no more important than the advent of movies, moving pictures, or television, there is a chance it will mean something more. Something along the lines of a universal language of ideas and emotions, something like a smile. The first publications of electronic arts are now available. We suspect you'll be hearing a lot about them. Some of them are games like you've never seen before that get more out of your computer than other games ever have. Others are harder to categorize, and we like that. Watch us. We're providing a special environment for talented, independent software artists. It's a supportive environment in which big ideas are given room to grow. And some of America's most respected software artists are beginning to take notice. We think our current work reflects this very special commitment. And though we are few in number today and apart from the mainstream of the mass software marketplace, we are confident that both time and vision are on our side. Join us, we see farther. All right, so that was this sort of mystical attitude toward computers that nobody was expressing in 1983. This picture, the reason I put the Beatles album cover in the lower right-hand box is because we decided it would be worth it to track down the photographer who had made that photograph of the Beatles and hire him to set up this sort of interesting photograph of our artists. So the people in the picture are not us at all. Those are the software artists. Those are the people that wrote the first products that we published. And we adopted the attitude that we were going to try to treat them like entertainers, like musicians or music people, try to get them to build a fan base of people who liked their work and would come back and play. And so what we did was we packaged our software by next slide. Here we go. We packaged our software more like record albums, and putting really interesting graphics on the front. They opened out. They were 8 inches square. You know, do any of you remember what a record is, and what the albums used to look like? They were about maybe 16 inches square, and cardboard, but they had very interesting, usually good. Well, like the Beatles album had interesting photographs or graphics on the front. And they always had liner notes, too. And a lot of those record albums would open out like in a double page kind of thing. Well, we did that with these products as well. So they were very thin. We slipped a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk inside, and then on the liner notes inside the package, we had interviews with the artists. We'd ask them to express why they did their this game software, what they were expecting to get out of it, what they hoped people who used it would get out of it, and we tried to build up a fan base for them. It worked, sort of. But notice in May of 1983 is when we released these 7 products. We had promised our investors we would release at least 6 in 6 months, and so we met our goal, met our promise. And I remember when we were starting out, it was the executives. There were about 8 of us by then. We split up the country and carved up the United States, and we each took 2 weeks and went out to our assigned geographic areas and sold these products into retailers by ourselves, making cold calls. I remember going into, back then software was predominantly being sold by mom and pop computer stores. So they were selling parts to computers and computers themselves, and then they'd usually have a wall of software hanging in baggies. You know what a baggie is? Clear plastic bag. And so when I'd walk into these, I'd go to a town, a city, St. Louis or Dallas, and I can't, it's hard to remember. I'd have to go to the phone book and look up computer stores, the Yellow Pages. And I'd find all the computer stores that were in town. I'd have to use a map to try to figure out where they were located. And then I'd just drive from one to the other. But I remember walking into those stores and saying to the owners, my name is Jeff Burton, I'm from Electronic Arts. And they'd say, electronic parts? I said, no, Electronic Arts. And then I'd have in my bag some of these software titles. And I'd say, here, we're a new kind of software company. We only do disk-based software. And here are some of our examples. And they were always amazed. They'd say, wow, I've got to have some of those to put in my store, because they were attention attractions. So the marketing of the software was really important, and it proved we proved the idea that despite the fact we weren't engineers, we were a great marketing team could do a great job with publishing and distributing software, because you do have to push it. It doesn't just people don't get attracted to it, and sort of like engineers like to think that if they invent the better mousetrap, of course everybody will come running to buy it. Well, it doesn't happen that way even today. So, so back then, what were we thinking? And we made internally a video in 1983 that gave some hints, because we needed to look like and seem like a very important big company to actually what we did was we found sales reps across the country to get them to take our line on and sell into all the stores they went to at the time. We needed to look like a serious and potentially very important company. So you can show the next slide, which is
In order for us to do what we are trying to do, we have to be obsessed, and we have to be a little bit arrogant, and we have to be a little bit cocky about having a sense of possibilities that are open to us that aren't open to others because of our convictions. And if we didn't feel that way, if we didn't even have a little bit of sense of not knowing what we don't know, and if we were too conscious of the pitfalls, if we were too conscious of the obstacles, we might lose our conviction. And we really do have the sense of really being obsessed with it and really believing that we know how to do it better than everybody else. And that may seem arrogant, but if we didn't feel that way, we wouldn't be able to pull it off. And it's because we feel that way that we're going to.
Okay, Tripp expressed there what all of us felt. And I'd say the perfect example, he describes perfectly what it took and still today takes. I work with startup companies all over the Bay Area, and the founders have to have that feeling that Tripp just expressed, which is we know how to do what we're doing better than anybody else. We don't quite know what we might run into in the future, and that's better, because if we did know all that stuff, we might lose our conviction and not want to continue, because startup companies and founders never realize how hard it is to make a company succeed. But so his expression there of what we were, that sort of attitude, it may sound arrogant, because we had to say, look, we know how to do this better than anybody else. But that's how you have to think as an entrepreneur starting a company, both back then and today. I see it again. That attitude is rampant among all entrepreneurs who are starting companies. Want to do the next one?
We're at the start of things, and it's just settling down. How this business is really going to be run and organized is, I think Electronic Arts is going to be one of the leaders because of the professionalism of the people that are planning the organization and doing a lot of thinking about the structure of the artist relative to the producer inside the company, relative to the production and distribution aspects all being, integrated into one package. It's more or less where the thinking's got to be. It used to be just a guy in his garage can start selling. And that's still true today to some extent. But it doesn't go very far. And Budge could tell you, you can try that and you get your family involved in working on it. But in the end, you really need to understand how to market the product as well as develop it.
Okay, that's the main point. Even then you had to understand how to market the product as well as develop it. It's true today, even though it's very easy to launch a product in the App Store or on the Play Store. You still have to be able to market that product somehow or another, and that was what Steve Wozniak was getting at. And he was on our board and an investor, and so it was great to have him be involved with us too. The next one is go ahead. It's
possible for a computer.
That's Bill Budge you were
provide
referring to.
a world where the rules are open-ended, where if you're flying around a planet and you decide to take off toward that star, you can.
We can evoke in people a sense of, wonder, curiosity, intrigue, maybe a little smile for a grandson who learned how to do something on a grandfather's machine.
But I'd like to write some software that interacts with you in a way that's really closer to the way a person would interact with you.
You may become attached to some of the software characters, and you may develop emotional feelings about some of the personalities in the software.
That's why I've been mentioning the idea of a software friend. And that sort of should be built into a computer, but it can be built into a program too.
A lot of good designs just cause you to smile. I mean, you look at it and you want to smile.
So the number of people in 1983 talking about having a software friend in a computer was about, maybe 3 or 4 people, 5 people in the industry back then in the Bay Area, some sort of the futurist thinkers. But that's what Bill Budge, one of our product developers, that was we licensed his software, that was what he was thinking about. And that's what we all were kind of thinking about, trying to figure out how can you make an emotional attachment, how can you create an emotional attachment to this inanimate computer. Shall we do the next one?
Parents want products that have educational value, but products that their children are going to want to use. Kids that are interested in computing, they want products that are fantastically entertaining and exciting and compelling. And that's really the major part of the market.
We're focusing on younger people, and education is the most important thing in their lives, and entertainment is the most interesting thing, and it's usually divergent from education. All of a sudden with computers, we've got technology marrying the two together in a way that might be very productive.
So what I think about those clips is that they were 33 years, 2 years ago, and those ideas are still prevalent and guiding in the software world today. Only now is there starting to be a move to really utilize software well in education. We could never make it happen at Electronic Arts. Now with the iPad and all the apps that are available for the iPad, I know of some schools, pre-K to 6th grade, who are basing their entire curricula on the iPad and apps. It can be done, and it makes education so much more fun and compelling, and students love school when they go to that kind of school. That's what we wanted to try to do 33 years ago, but we just couldn't make it happen. I think it's greatly due to the fact that now with the iPad, basically every student can have an iPad. So how do we do internationally with Electronic Arts? I'll go through that pretty quickly. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Anyway, so we started out by, our first step was to export products. We just manufactured them locally in Palo Alto. Yeah, it was in Palo Alto. And we were using telex machines, telephone, and letters of credit to try to get our products around the world. That was an extremely frustrating and slow process. Next slide. Second thing we did to try to improve that whole process was we did a European licensing deal with Bertelsmann, which is a big entertainment and publishing firm in Germany. And we licensed our products for them to manufacture them here locally, to change to translate the packaging into different languages. And that was took about 2 years. We did about 2 or 3 year license. I think it was 3 years. We had a manufacturing license with Bertelsmann for distribution all over Europe. And then next, the final thing was that we could do was create subsidiaries. And that's what we did. It was sort of those stages, went through those stages. We created a subsidiary in the UK, built a subsidiary, KK, in Tokyo, and bought our Australian distributor so that we could have our own businesses around the world. So the result of that is for the last 3 years, and many years before too, but I just picked up these 3 because I wanted to show that, in fact, international business for Electronic Arts has been for many years, and continues to be, the bulk of the business. That represents, in 2013, as you can see, 55% up to this past year, it was 57% of the company's revenues. And the company's revenues are about $4.5 billion a year. So international business for Electronic Arts became dominant. I'd always thought it would, although I left at year 7 when we went public, because that way I could do what I wanted to do, which is basically raise my kids and handle my own investments and do other startups. I'll just add, Trip left at year 9 to start a company called 3DO, which was a base unit for video games. It didn't succeed. And the only person of our, the only person of our group, our original 6 members that stayed for a truly long time, was Bing, and he was there for 27 years, something like that. He's now with Kleiner Perkins as an investor. But anyway, so it has become now obvious that every company that expects to be significant at all has to have global sales, global penetration. We didn't have to in 1982 in order to become successful. In fact, our investors said, "Don't bother with international business." And I said, "Hold on a second, we have to, but not like you have to today." So it's much easier today to be in fact, you have to be a global company the minute that you launch anything today, because everything is global. The internet has changed all of that. The only problem is Silicon Valley is pretty much the center of the globe. So what you have to do is establish a presence and a network of contacts in Silicon Valley. That seems to be essential in order to become truly a global company. There are exceptions, of course, but still to this day, Silicon Valley is the place where there's the funding, there's the all of the hoopla about startups, and press comes there, and you can really make an impression if you're there. And you don't have to stay there, but you need to get some experience there. So what I've been working on recently, this stealth project, as I call it, is a private-public partnership. And to begin with, we've started by bringing companies from Poland to Silicon Valley for a period of time to get them immersed in the culture and the mindset of Silicon Valley, because it's totally different than any place else in the world. Any place else in the United States is different from. So I still consider it an essential place to be, or an essential place to understand the mentality of. The performance bar is very, very high for companies, startup companies in Silicon Valley. And I think it's always a shock for companies outside the United States, or actually from Austin, Texas, to come to Silicon Valley and realize, oh my God, these companies are really moving fast and performing much better than I am, and it makes you want to, compete more. It's a very competitive place. Every bar, restaurant, hotel, shopping center you go through in the Bay Area, you'll overhear people talking about startup issues. You know, I'm walking down the street, you can hear somebody saying, well, I think that our valuation should be, and you think, God, it's on everybody's lips. So it's a mentality that you just don't get anywhere else. And the relationship or the partnership that we've created is with QBN here in Krakow. And then we bring companies to the Bay Area. This is the peninsula. Here's Stanford right here. We use GSV Labs as a location to bring companies and allow them to work with 80 other companies in the same workspace, which is great because they're able to exchange ideas, pick up tips from other companies at different stages in their lives. And so GSV Labs is right here it's Redwood City. By the way, Electronic Arts is right there, and their headquarters and campus is right there. Facebook's headquarters is right here. This is about a 15-minute drive between Woodside and GSV Labs, and then Sand Hill Road is another maybe 5 minutes. And Sand Hill Road is where every venture capital company of any significance is located in Sand Hill Road. So there's hundreds of billions of dollars under management at Sand Hill Road along there. So it's actually handy to be close because you can, once you have your network set up and your the introductions and doors open that you need as a startup company, you're right there to go talk with the investors at Sand Hill Road. And of course, there's a ton of resources at Stanford. Because that place just hops with students who are trying to start companies. It's kind of amazing. UC Berkeley is a great school across the bay, and it's about 3 times the size of Stanford. But there's not nearly all the activity. Incredibly, is either in San Francisco or on the peninsula. It's not in Berkeley, and the Berkeley students. You go to Stanford, again, everybody's talking about startups and doing them and trying to get them going. At Berkeley, that's not the case at all. It's an amazing disparity between those two sides of the bay. And the fact of the matter is, you talk to people, you talk to people in, did I lose it again? Sorry. Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry. I dropped it out of its system. People on the peninsula never go to the East Bay. I lived on the peninsula for 40 years. I went to the East Bay maybe 40 times. Once a year, I'd go across the bridges to the East Bay. So the place to be is in the Bay Area if you want to get involved and immersed in the mentality of Silicon Valley. And with this relationship that we have with QBN in Krakow, we are recruiting companies from Poland and bringing them to the Bay Area to get them accustomed to the feel, get them immersed in what's going on there and how to compete with the rest of the world's companies. And then when they come back to their homes in Poland, we end up following them here back home after giving them a month to get back into things here, and then reinforcing what was the experience that they had in the Bay Area and some of the things that they learned in Silicon Valley, and we come over here to help reinforce those things and help them grow more here too. And what's interesting to me is we've had one batch of experiences so far, and my impression after having come here to meet with these companies is that they have really taken steps to improve their performance here in Poland. It's not like they automatically had the ability to become global in Silicon Valley over a 60, 90-day period of immersion, but what it did was it raised their confidence level so much that they're making great strides now that they're back in Poland. They feel like they can do it. They feel the confidence that they know what it takes, and I'd say they do. So that's the opportunity that we're trying to build here with Poland, because there's such creativity here, as I know the speakers before have said that too, and it's very clear. that that's the case. So people ask me all the time, is it too late to start a company? And my reaction is, we had a marketplace when we started Electronic Arts of about 5 million install base, and there's now, 3.5 billion cell phones and I think smartphones are actually up to 2 billion now around the world. That's a huge marketplace. And right now there cannot be too many companies started. So it's the best time in my life to start a company. So I encourage you all to do it. And future's so bright, I gotta wear shades. There's music with that, but it's a quote from a song that was back in the 80s or something like that. But that's my main message to you today, is that it's a great time to be a startup company, and I think you should pursue it if you possibly can, because it's a privilege to do it. Thank you.